This is Ace the Yogi, and you're listening to the Sacred Koi podcast, where ancestral wisdom meets embodied healing. Over recent years, many Black and Brown communities have begun returning to their sacred roots, not just out of curiosity, but out of necessity. On this show, I explore what it truly means to reclaim our bodies and to live in our power through conversations on spiritual remembering, sexual liberation, and Black joy. This episode took me a while to pull together because it's a topic that deeply impacts me personally, but also so many of the people and communities that I love. My intent and wish is to share knowledge and hopefully reveal new connections for those who are open enough to listen with curiosity. I chose to title this episode Moving Away from the Binary, the Yin and Yang of Life, because so few people that I speak to or in front of don't realize the correlation between suffering and the binary. And I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit later. But first, I want to ground this episode in a bit of terminology so that you, my listeners, are on the same base level of understanding as myself and those in my industry of sex education. Generation by generation, pronunciations evolve. New words are borrowed or invented. The meaning of old words shifts, and terminology either develops or decays. Language itself contributes to human evolution by creating new ways of communicating thoughts, ideas, self expression, and social architectures. Language also gives us the ability to create new structures, new technology, and new social systems. So, as we evolve as a human species, so shall the language we use. Let's start by breaking down the terms sex and gender. People use these interchangeably all the time, but from a scientific or biological standpoint, they're really not the same thing. A person's sex is, in fact, biologically defined. However, there is so much more nuance around the biology of sex. For instance, most people only understand a person's sex based on their X and Y chromosomes and or the genitalia that they were born with. The misinformation around this leads to a large percentage of our population believing that there are only two sexes, female and male. This is biologically incorrect. For some people listening, the identification of a third sex is nothing new or mythical. Biologically, there are millions of people in the world who are born with both female and male genitalia. These individuals are classified as intersex, though some older generations may understand this classification through a more derogatory term known as hermaphrodite, which is an outdated and medically incorrect term used for humans born with both genitalia. But the diversity of the human species is much more vast than just these three classifications. While most humans are born with XX or XY chromosomes, biologically, sex is a spectrum that includes various chromosomal patterns, such as XXY or just a single X, or individuals with mosaicism, which occurs naturally and contribute to the intersex experience. Now, mosaicism basically means that some cells in a person's body carry one genetic code, such as XX chromosomes, while other cells carry a completely different one, like XY, or again, just having a single X. This often occurs when a change happens in early development. This is different from atypical individuals who generally have the same genetic information in every single cell of their body. Think of it like a quilt. While some bodies are made up of one solid fabric, A body with mosaicism is composed of different patches of genetic fabric that grew together during early development. Because this affects cells at a microscopic level, it rarely shows up as visible physical traits, which is why most people who have mosaicism have no idea they have it unless they happen to have specific medical testing done. These variations are simply different ways our human biology expresses itself beyond the typical binary. But regardless of a person's genetic code, all of these variations occur naturally and can be witnessed in other species around the planet, such as clownfish, for example. You know, the ones from Finding Nemo, they can naturally change their sex as they age or in response to their environment. And as a plant lover and owner to over 300 indoor plants myself, this variation can also be witnessed in plants like anthuriums, which naturally produce both female and male reproductive parts within the same flower structure, allowing them to self pollinate. And so now that we have a base understanding of sex, let's talk gender. Gender refers to the distorted, socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. The distinction here is biology versus social construct. Gender says that because a person is born with a penis, that they must identify as a boy or a man and use he, him pronouns. Gender says that boys do not cry. Gender says that boys do not wear dresses. Boys cannot be soft. Boys must be promiscuous and dominating. But a person's gender is not genetic. It can be fluid and it can change over periods of growth, exploration, and self discovery. It is based on human perspective, which evolves throughout time, but is often seen in relationship with how societal systems view and maintain power structures. Taking this a step further, I want to quickly touch on the difference between gender and sexual orientation, because I find that these terms are also often misunderstood and used heavily synonymously. But again, they're not the same thing. Now, remember, gender is a social construct that reflects a society's distorted view of a person's sex in terms of acceptable roles, behaviors, and expressions. But a person's sexual orientation describes who a person is attracted to and wants to have a relationship, either platonic or romantic. Sexual orientation includes being gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual, or even asexual. For example, a person who identifies as non binary can also be straight, they can be gay, they can be bisexual, or even asexual, which basically just means that they experience no sexual attraction to anyone. Asexual. A person's gender does not reveal their sexual orientation. And that confuses a lot of people because for so many of us, we view the world around us from a lens of a binary. It's either this or that, black or white. So, how can we learn to release this conditioning? And what is the benefit in doing so? Well, one way of doing this can be understood from the context of queerness. This word is widely used when speaking of the LGBTQ. However, it's not widely understood outside of the community. There are various definitions of queer and queerness, but again, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to use a base level definition of this term. So, queer or queerness is oftentimes used as an umbrella term to describe anyone who is strange, odd, or weird, based on established societal standards or heterosexual norms of gender and sexuality. This term has evolved over the years. So, as it was once used as a derogatory term, it has since been reclaimed by the LGBTQIA plus community as a catch all term for LGBTQ people. However, it should be noted that just because a person belongs to the LGBTQ plus community does not mean they identify as queer or even accept that classification for themselves. It's always important to ask people how they choose to identify. My journey. Allow me to share my own personal evolution and self discovery. From birth, I knew I was different. My mother would often tell me stories of how I would explore every new environment she would take me to. Early on, I even had dreams of being an archaeologist because I loved to play in the dirt and piece together old fragmented shells in our backyard with hopes of discovering some ancient fossils. Needless to say, I was a very unruly, defiant, and difficult child at home. I considered myself to be a tomboy at this point in my life. I grew up with an older brother whom I idolized, and in some ways I still do. But I quickly began to learn the difference between me and him at the age of 9 when I started my period, and soon after started to grow breast. Like any younger sibling, I wanted to be just like my older brother. I wanted to play all the same games as him. I wanted all the same toys he had. I wanted to hang out with his friends and enjoy the same level of freedom that he had. But puberty forced me into a painful cage. I started receiving messaging from the world that girls don't play in the dirt or horse around with boys, that girls are meant to be quiet and look pretty. Well, I rejected this conditioning. My mom would spend hours doing my hair before school, and within the first hour, I'd mess it up, sometimes on purpose, because the pressure to perform girlhood made me feel like an imposter in my own skin. I was heavily sexualized from the age of 12 onward. In fact, my body had matured so much and so soon that I looked like I was 16 when I was only 12. And naturally, like any little girl going through puberty, I thought something was wrong with my body. I thought I was ugly. I couldn't understand why grown men would stare at me with what I now understand as lust in their eyes. I just knew I felt uncomfortable in my body as a girl and craved so much for the perceived freedom of being a boy. Where I could once walk around the house shirtless as a small child, my growing breasts forced me to hide. I remember hating them when they first grew in because their growth was painful and the training bras that I was forced to wear were so uncomfortable. My breasts would get in the way of me playing the same games on the playground. And even the other kids, both boys and girls, were always trying to touch them out of curiosity. I spent many years, both as a child and an adult, rejecting the roles and behaviors that were forced upon me in relation to my developing body. But today, I can proudly say that I love my breast and the fullness of my body. I've learned that reclaiming my autonomy didn't need to equal rejecting my form, but alternatively, learning to finally feel home within it. Fast forward to my late 20s, and I was presented with the opportunity to get my yoga certification from a queer led yoga studio in West Philly called Studio 34, which is a pinnacle in the community and a major shift in my reality shaping. At this point in my life, I had traveled to at least 5 different countries and even lived in a foreign country for years. I felt like I had been exposed to a lot of different cultures and communities, but it wasn't until I came to this yoga studio in Philly that I began to really learn about the diversity of gender. This was a 6-month yoga training program. And on the first day, I heard multiple people introduce themselves using they, them pronouns. In that moment, my mind was expanded to a new reality. I had a choice, and it was my choice to make. And out of my own curiosity, I introduced myself as Ace, they, them, she. This was also the first time I had ever used my preferred name, Ace, and it felt good to be seen for the first time. For the next 3 years, I advocated for myself more than I had previously up to that point in my life. I advocated for my dignity, for my self respect, and the respect from others to refer to me by my preferred pronouns. Though I still felt attached to the gender assigned to me at birth, I often introduced myself using they, them, she. But eventually, I realized that this attachment only confused others and inadvertently gave people permission to not respect or learn my preferred pronouns of they, them. This was also something I needed to come to terms with myself. Am I in alignment with who I say I am? I had to ask myself, was I playing it safe for their comfort, or was I standing in the truth of who I am? That question started a period of transition that was as liberating as it was exhausting for me. Liberating and finally having the language to describe my lived experience, and in the beginning stages of learning how to speak up for myself. But it was equally exhausting because of the sheer amount of people that I had to correct on a daily basis and the ignorance I would encounter from the community that I loved the most, Black people. I had so much more acceptance and curiosity from white communities than my own people. And that part hurt the most because for me, my Blackness will always come first. I reached the tip of this iceberg when a colleague of mine in the holistic sexual health field questioned me about my identity. I initially thought that she was asking me out of curiosity until her response to my answer was that I was confused. Me. I am confused about how I view myself. That was her dismissive way of putting me in check, correcting my self image based on her distorted view of gender and identity. Years prior to this exchange, I also had a therapist whom I had been seeing for 2 years tell me that I was confused. But it wasn't until I had this interaction with a colleague that I realized how small minded and confined even the concept of being non binary had become. From her perspective, she conflated being non binary and transgender as the same thing. I think she also conflated my non binary with me possibly being gay or bisexual. I don't think she fully understood the difference between my gender and my sexual orientation. But for clarity purposes, let me specify how I identify and what that actually means for me, because no one can tell me how I experience this world through my avatar but me. Audre Lorde famously said, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. Well, I don't consent to cannibalism. I identify as non binary. I use they, them pronouns unless I give you permission to refer to me otherwise. But I prefer being called by my chosen name, Ace. Just Ace. I identify as queer and pansexual. And for those who care, I am also Afro Native. I am of the Halawa Sapone tribe of North Carolina. but I don't know where my ancestors come from in Africa, though I have strong ties to the Igbo tribe of Nigeria through my husband, and subsequently also accept my given Igbo name, Ifunanya, meaning love in Igbo. And this is where the journey to my truth began, a movement away from those rigid binaries and back toward the balance of my own natural internal rhythm. The number one question I get in regards to my gender identity and chosen pronouns is, what does that actually mean? What does that mean? Everything is energy. Well, the confusing answer is it can mean different things for different people. There is no one answer to this question because, in itself, being non binary means to unsubscribe from the binary entirely. Having only two options is just too confining and unnatural. Some non binary people don't see themselves as male or female, while others see themselves as both. And then there are others who see their gender as fluid and constantly changing, making it hard for them to subscribe to just one. And it's not my job nor my desire to say that any of us is wrong. But for me, my gender identity is directly linked to my spiritual beliefs. I see myself as both male and female, man and woman, because I possess both yin and yang energies, the sperm and the egg, the feminine and the masculine. They are inseparable. For me, my pronouns and gender identity encompass the fullness of my experience and have less to do with what's between my legs or how society views gender. I am a spiritual being having a human experience. Nikola Tesla said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Well, everything is energy. And the law of conservation states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it can only be transferred or transformed. This mirrors the ancient philosophy of yin and yang, which predates modern physics. Both reveal a universe in constant motion where energy is eternally recycled, shifting between opposing yet interdependent forms. For a non binary person like myself, this principle affirms that identity is a fluid, continuous transformation of energy that exists on a spectrum and defies rigid categorization. The philosophy of yin and yang symbolizes harmony, representing feminine and masculine energies, though these shouldn't be taken as a literal marker for female or male, but as natural forces working together, much like the union of the sperm and egg, where life itself is born from their balance. I've learned that when these forces are out of sync, they can become distorted. Too much yin can lead to stagnation, while too much yang can lead to burnout. Fostering integration between the two is how I cultivate my own growth and navigate the world. Unfortunately, colonization, patriarchy, and capitalism have fractured our inner worlds and created wounds of imbalance. Many of us, especially BIPOC and queer folks, are conditioned to survive by overdeveloping one energy and disowning the other. Things like toxic masculinity or machismo and toxic femininity are a result of this. When we overdevelop our yang energy, we run the risk of trading our heart for domination and repression. Alternatively, when we overdevelop our yin energy, we risk trading our power and our voice for self erasure and dependency. These distortions are inherently survival strategies, but my journey is about moving past merely surviving and reclaiming what it means to live a sacred life. My non binary identity is my path back to this balance and harmony within. It provides me the space to experience the fullness of my own humanity and reconnect with Source through self compassion. African traditions. As a queer non binary person of the LGBTQ plus community and descendant of the transatlantic slave trade, I am repeatedly disappointed by the leadership and governance on the continent. As of date, 32 of the 54 countries on the continent of Africa have some form of colonial era anti LGBTQ laws. The very birthplace of human civilization is home to some of the most violent and horrendous views of sex and sexuality. Leaders in these countries often stating that's not our culture, but then go on to cite religious texts imposed during colonization to oppress the very spirit of humanity. It's a cruel irony that leaders today dismiss queer identity as un African when the homophobia they enforce is actually a colonial import, which began in the 1837 Indian Penal Code. This code was drafted by the British to criminalize carnal intercourse against the order of nature. This code was applied to more than 30 British colonies, which included Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Sudan, and Botswana, effectively rebranding foreign prejudice as local tradition. As some historians have noted, colonization didn't bring same sex acts to Africa. It brought the legal and religious systems that classified those acts as crimes and sins. Through what activists call a double erasure, these laws didn't just ban the practice, they systemically stripped away the language and memory required to name them, forcing us to reclaim a history that was deliberately buried. The truth is, pre colonial African societies celebrated same sex relationships and gender diverse people. In fact, the concept of a female husband and male royal concubines were widely common across the continent. Much deeper evidence of this can be witnessed through traditional spiritual beliefs, where some deities were classified as androgynous. We can see these traditions through pre colonial Africa, where gender diversity was integrated into the spiritual and social fabric of their communities. For example, the Ila people of Zambia recognized the Mwami prophets as male spiritual leaders who embodied both masculine and feminine traits to act as a bridge between the human and spirit realms. In northern Nigeria, the pre Islamic Hausa society of the Bori religion honored the Yandaudu, a subculture of feminine presenting or transgender men who moved between gender boundaries with unique spiritual status. Within the same region, the Igbo people of Nigeria also practice gender fluidity through female husband unions, allowing women of high status to take titles and marry other women to secure lineage. While the Nzema people of Ghana recognize friendship marriages as socially sanctioned and acceptable forms of union between two men. Ultimately, these traditions often view gender as a manifestation of energy and not simply anatomy. The Dagara people of Burkina Faso, for instance, identify gatekeepers or healers who move between worlds as inherently fluid, a quality that grants them a unique sight, inaccessible to those bound by rigid binaries. I witnessed this integration firsthand during my recent trip to West Africa. In the Vodum and Ifa cosmologies of Benin, Togo, and Nigeria, androgyny is held as sacred and seen in deities like the cosmic force of Sogbo and the great serpent Ayitawedo, twin forces representing the union of opposites. I invite you to see these stories in the land itself by joining me over on my YouTube channel for a guided tour of the sacred forest of Kapase in Benin. I've linked that video in the show notes so you can experience these living ritual sites for yourself. Because these traditions were widely oral, they lived in songs, stories, and secret ritual codes rather than written archives. I've also compiled a list of resources to support my claims in the show notes for you to explore further. While these histories offer a path to understanding the past, they also provide a blueprint for how we can manage our own spirit today. So remember, everything is energy. And as humans, we are the ones who decide what we manifest. Since energy cannot be destroyed but only transferred, we must remember that whatever we project into this world, we hold in our own hearts first. Hatred is a poisonous weight that eventually causes our own sickness. But love and curiosity are the forces that heal and create new worlds and better realities. As you reflect on this episode, ask yourself, where in your own life have you been conditioned to overdevelop one energy at the expense of your own wholeness? I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments on Substack or YouTube. And remember, your freedom is on the other side of fear, and only love and curiosity can transmute that fear. I love you.